Nets head into the NBA offseason with a bunch of question marks, and one of those big ones is Kyrie Irving.
I feel really empathetic towards the Brooklyn Nets. Actually, no, scratch that. I feel really empathetic towards Kevin Durant. I'm not even sure if that's true. I feel really empathetic for Brooklyn Nets fans. All right, yeah, that's the right one. Primarily because this is the most hope that the Brooklyn Nets have had since the 2014 season, when they had that big four of Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, Darren Williams, and Joe Johnson. Obviously, that didn't end up working out, and I don't want to say this is a catastrophe on the same tier, but it definitely is a strange situation, and it's getting even worse since the last video we've made on it. So before we get to the content, we're making a huge push on TikTok, so make sure you follow me on TikTok at TheFlightMike. And now that we got all of that out of the way, cue the intro. This video is sponsored by Manscaped. Now, you guys know I absolutely love Manscaped's Lawnmower 4.0. I use it on a bi-weekly basis in my gym shower, but don't tell the custodian that. And it's the best beard and body trimmer for any man. Mainly because the trimmer has cutting-edge skin-safe technology to ensure that you don't get any nicks or pulls while you're manscaping. It has a 4K LED light so you could see where you're manscaping. And with Father's Day coming up, it is the perfect gift to get your dad. But in addition to this, I was always a fan of Manscaped's Boxers 1.0. So when I saw that they released a Boxers 2.0, I got so freaking excited. These are the most comfortable boxers I've ever worn in my entire life. I mean, just like look at the boxers. They're so luxurious in terms of like how they look. But honestly, more important than anything, these are so freaking comfortable to wear. I'm especially excited because I'm going to a music festival this weekend, and they sent me these right in time for the music festival. And when you're standing on your feet for like 11 to 12 hours, having boxers to make sure that you don't chafe and that you're comfortable with so you can enjoy yourself is so freaking important. It has stitchless inner pouch support with a spaciously designed outer pouch, which makes it roomy yet supportive once you're wearing it. It's the perfect gift to get either for yourself or for Father's Day. And right now, when you use my promo code FLIGHT, you get yourself 20% off on Manscaped products. Just use my promo code FLIGHT when you're checking out at manscaped.com. And thank you, Manscaped, for the sponsorship. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? You guys remember when there was a time where Brooklyn Nets and the Los Angeles Lakers were supposed to be in this year's NBA Finals? Do you remember how they were already creating crazy narratives? How Kyrie Irving was going to face off against LeBron James in the finals. Kevin Durant and James Harden were going up against Russell Westbrook. It was just filled with these adorable narratives, and inevitably both teams failed. And if you don't want to be that extreme, you could at least admit that both teams fell short of their expectations. And currently, both of these teams, the Brooklyn Nets and the Los Angeles Lakers, are going into a very pivotal offseason. And we've covered the Los Angeles Lakers at length recently, and we're going to come out with a separate video on the Lakers' current situation. But I wanted to focus on the Brooklyn Nets here because we got a lot of crazy reports in this video. And first, we're going to start with Kyrie Irving. Then we're going to talk about how Kevin Durant has been alienated by the Brooklyn Nets and has pretty much ghosted the Brooklyn Nets. So let's get it started. If you remember in my last video, it seems like the Brooklyn Nets have shown to be unwilling to offer Kyrie Irving a long-term extension due to his injury history and his unpredictability. Now, this is very consistent with the report I brought you guys last week, which is essentially saying the exact same thing. And if you remember, back in October, I made another video in regards to this. Now, I wanted to give you a disclaimer. The source from this is an individual that, with all due respect to him, I haven't really heard of up until this moment, so let's proceed with caution here. But this is at the very minimum, at the base level, this is a report that we've heard 2 other times over the past year and for the second time in the past week. And what's interesting about this report is Kyrie Irving is a huge domino for the Brooklyn Nets. If you remember, Kevin Durant essentially left the comfortable confines of the Golden State Warriors dynasty, which, if you ask me, was a legacy altering mistake for him, because if he had stayed on the Golden State Warriors and was able to carry the Golden State Warriors with Steph Curry after Klay Thompson injured himself for the entirety of the season, not when he tore his ACL in the NBA Finals, because that's when Kevin Durant was injured as well, because Kevin Durant tore his Achilles in the same exact series that Klay Thompson tore his ACL. But if you remember, the very next season, Klay Thompson was out once again because he tore his Achilles right before the NBA draft. This would have provided Kevin Durant with the perfect opportunity to step up for the Golden State Warriors, and he would have essentially won himself a ring that quote unquote counted. Now, I'm not one of those individuals that like to sit back and address meaning to championship rings, because at the end of the day, looking into it 20 years down the line, no one is going to really look back at the time that Kevin Durant joined the Golden State Warriors to win his championships. I'm just going to be honest, you might remember it currently, but that next generation of players aren't going to remember it either. Just as you probably don't remember the fact that the Showtime Lakers and the Boston Celtics of the mid-80s were pretty much super teams as well when you take a look at the amount of all-stars that were on both of those teams. Nobody remembers this stuff, but I digress. Kevin Durant essentially chose to play with Kyrie Irving, who was a guy that was his best friend in addition to being an absolutely talented basketball player, over playing with the Golden State Warriors. And the theory, at least behind this, is the fact that Kevin Durant would be able to go to a team in a large market, Brooklyn, build up a franchise that hasn't had success since the Jason Kidd era of the early 2000s, and back then they were the New Jersey Nets, and take this team from a team that was rebuilding, although they were a very promising culture, might I add, with Kenny Atkinson at the head coaching position. D'Angelo Russell was developing very, very well. Spencer Dinwiddie came out of freaking nowhere, and he was developing really well under Kenny Atkinson, pretty much moving on from that team to bring on Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. And if the Brooklyn Nets decide not to bring back Kyrie Irving, obviously this is going to upset Kevin Durant. And ultimately, I can understand the Brooklyn Nets' frustration with Kyrie Irving. Obviously, he hasn't played in many games since joining the Brooklyn Nets. As a matter of fact, Kyrie Irving has only played in 103 games in the 3 seasons that he's played with the Brooklyn Nets. To give you an idea, that is less than half of the games that are available for him to play. And when you're paying a player that type of money, it makes a lot of sense for wanting to move on from him. And it seems like Kevin Durant is very frustrated about this, or he's just frustrated with the way things are going down with the Brooklyn Nets in general. Bear in mind, this isn't an individual that was necessarily excited when James Harden was traded from the Brooklyn Nets to the Philadelphia 76ers. If you remember his demeanor during the All-Star draft this past year, he was a guy that just didn't like the situation he was in. And there were rumors that the reason why James Harden wanted off of the Brooklyn Nets was, one, he wasn't being featured primarily in the offense, but two, there were some rumors that he didn't like the way Kyrie Irving was going about the season. And honestly, that's stuff that I could believe. If you're a player like James Harden, who has yet to acquire a championship for himself, and if you're Kevin Durant, who gets sensitive about the comments that are said about him on social media, it makes a lot of sense that you really want to win a championship. And when Kyrie Irving isn't available for most of the season, and then at the conclusion of the season, he says that the fact that the Brooklyn Nets didn't have a lot of games together to form chemistry ended up being their demise, obviously it can get frustrating. But apparently it gets even worse. Kevin Durant and the Nets front office have not spoken since they were swept out of the first round. Now, this is from the Chris Splashed article, and to quote it outright, according to Chris, if Kyrie Irving leaves outright as a free agent this summer, disgruntled by the Brooklyn Nets' hardball stance on his availability, Brooklyn doesn't have the cap space to replace him with another star player, which means Kevin Durant entering year 16 could be playing with a questionable Ben Simmons and a roster full of role players. That's a first round exit at best if Durant stays to see it. And according to multiple sources, Durant and the Nets front office have not spoken since they were swept out of the first round. So in layman's terms, if Irving leaves the Brooklyn Nets, it wouldn't be a surprise if Durant becomes frustrated with the organization's ability to put championship pieces around him. They failed to do so at the beginning of last season, with none of their top offseason acquisitions, James Johnson, DeAndre Bembry, or Javon Carter, finishing the year in Brooklyn. So it seems like, at least according to Chris, the Nets' championship hopes hinge on an amicable solution with Kyrie Irving, whose personal decision not to get vaccinated and unpredictable injury history have left the Nets hesitant. And now, according to a source familiar with the Nets' thought process, outright unwilling to give him a long-term extension. And to be honest, this all seems fairly plausible. I don't know how real it is. I don't know if Kevin Durant is going to come out and say that it's real. Probably not. I really doubt he does. I feel like like this is one of those situations where it's best not to express whether or not this is true, and if anything, just come out and flat out deny the report. But it does make a lot of sense that if Kyrie Irving leaves, Kevin Durant will be frustrated. And considering how another star player already left in James Harden and they got Ben Simmons in return, clearly there are players that want to leave the Brooklyn Nets and the situation the Brooklyn Nets are in, especially considering the fact that they got swept this past season. It doesn't seem like the Brooklyn Nets are able to make any significant moves this offseason, other than this one rumor that absolutely is the most ridiculous rumor that I think I've ever read. But I'm going to read it to you guys just in case, but I still think this is an absolutely bizarre rumor. And that's the fact that Brooklyn Nets general manager Sean Marks and Los Angeles Lakers executive Rob Pelinka had a meeting at the Marriott Marquis this week at the NBA Combine. Unclear what they discussed: potential trade, dinner plans, comparing superstar headaches.
Oh, how about the fact that the Brooklyn Nets are going to trade Kyrie Irving for Russell Westbrook, reuniting Russell Westbrook with Kevin Durant, and oh my God, they're going to collab and win a championship.
That isn't going to happen, all right? I'm just going to tell you straight up. If it happens, obviously, it will send NBA Twitter into a blaze. But at the end of the day, Kyrie Irving is extremely unpredictable. If he decides to move on from the Brooklyn Nets, I think that's another fan base that might despise Kyrie Irving in addition to the Boston Celtics. So we're going to keep an eye on this situation as well. It's definitely not a good situation if you're a Brooklyn Nets fan, but the offseason is still yet to start, so hopefully we'll get some more positive news from there. Let me know what you guys think about this report. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.